It's not fitting in the screen. Okay, I'm Julia Scott. So I work over at the Santa Clara University in a program called the Healthcare Innovation Design Program. The kind of subset of that program I work in is the Brain and Memory Care Lab that was recently created as kind of the concentration of the work I do in this space became large enough.
No, keep going.
So one channel of the research that I do and what was highlighted in the Leonardo papers is on integrating biofeedback into VR experiences. And so I'm going to highlight two of the projects. One is Mandala Flow State, and I have some of my co-creators here on that project. And then the other is Fluorescence, which is a collaboration with a local high school, St. Francis High School. Okay. And really focusing on the, focusing on the design process that we use to create these experiences. Because when you're creating a biofeedback system and you're doing it in VR, you have to take into consideration so many dimensions. Much of the time when you're designing neurofeedback or biofeedback, you're taking a very simple signal extracted from breath, heart rate, a very simple brain activity measure, and turning it into a one-dimensional feedback signal. And you get this very flat interaction. When we're working in VR, we have more than just the visual or a beat or a simple song. We have 360 degrees. We have a sense of depth. We have spatial audio. We have the sense of presence. And we get to play with that when we're designing in VR, but it also makes the validation process much more complex. Okay, there we go. So to make this happen, a complex system happen, you need partners. So I want to highlight this first, what actually makes this happen. As I mentioned, we're under the umbrella of the Healthcare Innovation Program. At Santa Clara University, we have a dedicated XR studio called the Imaginarium, and Max Sims was the first director of that program and has been my partner on many projects since then. The St. Francis High School Innovation Program, led by Shweta Chupluk right here in the audience, and her many students. She brings amazing students to these projects. The first one of the other projects that we have shown, Mandala Flow State, would not have become a reality. This whole program of research wouldn't have happened without the San Francisco Asian Art Museum. They were the first group to believe in what I was proposing and basically commission a piece twice, right? Two versions of it. And then from Santa Clara, the Center for Digital Humanities has also supported this work. So when we're designing in these teams, there are two key principles we keep in mind as we go through this when it comes to biofeedback. One is we need to promote the desired state. In order to have that sense of embodiment and immersion, we need to create an environment that encourages you to become more relaxed or to become more focused, to manage your feelings. That has to stay in line the whole time. We can't create a VR experience that makes someone dizzy, right? That's going to throw you off. The other thing we need to keep in mind the entire time is interpretable feedback. Okay? So as we increase the level of dimensions, trying to understand the feedback cues also becomes a bit harder if you haven't designed an experience that has clear signals and their sense of presence, like where you know where you are. So Mandala Flow State is one, and this is the collaboration with the Asian Art Museum, and the second is Fluorescence, which is the collaboration with the high school. Okay, so what's our process? I know this type of figure is familiar to people at Stanford and most other universities, our design process wheel, but just to orient us, and because this is kind of the structure of the talk, first we start by researching the topic area. From that, we have our brainstorming process to come up with our array of ideas, organize it and distill it down, evaluate the design, prototype, test internally, and then have a public showcase. And you'll see this in both iterations. So I'm going to start with Mandala Flow State. So in Mandala Flow State, our stakeholders here, our partners in the build, are the researchers at Santa Clara and the museum. We have to bring together the objective of both these groups. We had very different objectives. I wanted to build an application that promoted focused relaxation. They wanted to build an application that would promote their special exhibit on Tibetan Buddhism. We had to meet both our objectives in the design. And so it took a lot of iteration to make that happen. The other component that they wanted to see was that we brought together both the modern and the traditional, using use of technology and traditional techniques in that sense of immersion. So here we have the neoclassical Tibetan art, algorithmic mandalas, as well as our inspiration piece, where I don't recall the name today, and traditional motifs and symbolism you would see in a Tibetan mandala. Okay. We went through multiple phases of internal testing. Here's an example that we did with the museum. And you can see the curator of the exhibit, Nicole there, designed the music. We have original music that is following the same principles. And I think this is the back of the head of Lee Harold, who is our primary programmer. So based on this feedback, we then created what was actually put out in the museum as a live installation. And what you're seeing here is the components of how we actually built this. And so, oh, that's much louder than I expected. Nope, that's just loud. So I wanted you guys to have the music in the background so you can start to get that sense of presence with these static images. But you start inside a temple column, which is what you see in A. And then what you see emerge gradually, as you can see here from the side view, is this three-dimensional mandala that has the architecture of this particular type. This fog cloud in front of it is our feedback cube. This is what it looks like when you're looking straight on. And the goal, your objective when you're in this, is to clear the fog so that you see the mandala without any obstruction. And in the details, we've integrated both traditional and algorithmic mandalas. And at the end, the mandala is swept away, as you would, to show the visualization you have of sweeping away a sand mandala. Okay, so here this is, that was kind of the experience as it is. This is what we have to do in the design process. Like, what are we doing at every single second? This is how it gets broken down and how these things come together. And in particular, we have as many senses engaged as possible. So we have the visual here with the mandala. We have a 1-minute calibration period or acclimation period. And then you have the mandala gradually form from the center until it disintegrates. With the soundscape, you start with the simple piano melody. Our inspiration point was a lot of Philip Glass music and that American minimalism. And then we integrate both the Tibetan instruments and our Western instruments. And that becomes the musical soundscape. Okay, and what are we thinking the user is doing in this time? The first seconds are just getting used to where they are. For our users, for many of them, this is the first time they've even put on a VR headset, first time they've ever put on an EEG device. So they need that acclimation period. They have a few minutes to try to get that association between the fog and their state of relaxation. And then the expectation was that they would be able to begin focusing on clearing the fog. And with the wind sweeping away, they come back to their physical space. This was our dream, right? We made it happen, but the question is, as linked to the museum, this was the actual thing happening in space. This was the Awaken exhibit. We also broadcast what was happening inside the tent. So the user is inside the tent in this quiet space. And then we broadcast what was going on outside so people can observe what is going on inside. And that engaged more people in the process. And so you had both the brain data, the EEG data, and the visualization, and people could begin to see the relationship between them, even if they weren't inside. Sorry. So that. Where's the volume? Sorry. Okay. And this is what the feedback typically looked like for a first-time user. tell me, do you see the fog clearing? I don't see the fog clearing. Our presumption on the density of the fog being linked to that focused relaxation actually became a difficult cue to interpret. So while the experience met that first objective of, yes, people felt more relaxed. We surveyed everybody. We got notes from lots and lots of people in their debrief coming out. And most people felt more relaxed. That was largely due to the soundscape, the visuals, being away from that noisy environment. But the feedback of when we're looking at the data, did they learn, at least in that short time, the association between alpha and the fog? And the answer was no. So that means we come back and redesign. And I'll show you the current redesign that Soren and Jinder have been working on. Okay, so project number 2 in the design process. The other project is fluorescence. Okay, fluorescence. The idea for this emerged by a collaboration between the innovation program and the healthcare program. And when we came together, we thought, okay, how can we take this mandala flow state and turn it into a design project for high school students who have never done VR, who have never worked in a game engine. And we want them to, and how to build sensors, how to build a pulse sensor, and teach them how to do all of this, and then create something to help their mental health. And we had 4 months. So this was the objective here. So we had our educational objectives. And we went to the students, surveyed them on what, when we're doing the application process, what's your interest in mental health? What's your interest in VR? When we found the intersection between them, those are the students we selected. And what they came up with, they wanted something to help with their stress management. Okay, these kids are, a lot is expected of them. They're in high pressure situations, much like, much like Stanford in a lot of ways. So they're under a lot of stress. So what we did was we used heart rate, so a simple pulse sensor that they built, and they came up with the idea of creating an immersive experience in a cave, okay? And not just any cave, okay? So one, building the sensors, but a very special cave. Has anyone been to New Zealand? Have you been to the glowworm caves? So that's what we were trying to emulate here. Okay. So going through that same design process that I described earlier, through the research, the brainstorming, and so on, figuring out what's the right biofeedback signal to use for stress management. It's not going to be for that acute stress management. I'm telling you, it's not alpha. It's not alpha power from the brain. It's really going to be the autonomic signals from the heart, your breathing. Those are much more powerful than the brain when it comes to this type of self-control. Okay, so they built their sensors. From that, they processed the data and used both heart rate and extracted heart rate variability, which is a very good metric of that emotional self-regulation. Next, they went through brainstorming process. And this took a lot of post-its in the classic way. We organized it into the different components of game design. And then, we had 9 people. You have 9 people's 900 ideas, and having to merge them together and finally settling in on the dream of a glowworm cave in New Zealand that one of the students dreamed of while stuck in her room through the pandemic. And that was her happy place. And she was able to convince the group that this was a happy place, and we tried to recreate it. And so they created this walk through a cave that had a mix of the realistic and the whimsy. The systems you see up here, these are particle systems, and the particle systems are responsive to heart rate. So the particle size, the diameter, fluctuates with the heart rate. Okay? And so you can view this as you're looking up. I'll show you the trailer shortly. And then as you reach the end, you reach this mother crystal, and that is responsive to the HRV. So the expectation is that by the time you get through this 5-minute walk, you would have had a more regular heart rate, a more fluid heart rate variability, and you would see that regular pulsing in the emissions from the crystal. Okay, so let me show this to you. So the naming, the tagline, that was all them as well. Very creative bunch. So what do you guys think? It was calming, haven to calm. Could you see the glowworm effect that I was describing? Not so much. That one's hard because it's a particle system. What about the pulsating crystal? I found that one a little bit easier, but the glowworm, that went back to the drafting board. We're working on revising that. And this is the part of responding to feedback. We go through, and so this demo, this was a quick 1-minute trailer, but the full arc of this, the students did do a public showcase, had lots of people try it for the first time, and also gathered that feedback. Because for them, their user base are their peers. It's their other classmates who are dealing with the same challenges. So now we have our next team, and they're responding to the feedback from the creators and the feedback from the users, and thinking about what are the next things we need to do to improve this so we meet those objectives of promoting the state we want and having interpretable feedback so that you can actually learn to regulate these cues. So on Mandala Flow State, our main takeaways was it was too slow, right? The colors were a little bit garish, but that was of the direction for the exhibit. And it was hard to see the feedback. So we quickened the pace, we changed the colors, we got a better color palette, and we've modified the fog so that it is synced with the breathing cycle. So we have a breathing cycle to promote it, and we have a change in the fog density. And I'm going to show you that sample in a moment. For fluorescence, we need to still validate our feedback cue, improve the immersion with interaction. In this first pass, you just walk through on a path at a fixed pace, because as I said, they learned Unity in 1 month and then built. And so we were working on minimal interaction. So now we can do that. And then what they want to add, when we did our brainstorm process this time, they want to display both the calm emotions and the stressful emotions, so that you can go through the experience, have something that triggers a level of tension, and have an opportunity to bring that level of arousal back down. So I've expanded the objective as well. Okay, and just to end it with what the feedback currently looks like with that breathing cycle that Soren has programmed in. And so this idea we have came up with in the last 7 days.
Yeah, week and a half.
Yeah, so we're getting there. The music isn't on right now, but you can see, you should see, kind of a pulsating wave within the fog. And right now the fluctuations in the fog are still at random. Or is this with your brain data? With your brain data? Okay, yeah. All right, with Soren's alpha power.
I limited a little bit just for the
yeah. Okay, so we're getting back in the right direction. You can see we've changed the colors around and the pacing around. But it's inch by inch, validating each component as we go through and really testing our assumptions. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just a creative process. The end goal in this line of research is to develop therapeutic tools so that these are well validated biofeedback for people to learn to manage their stress, to improve their concentration, as I mentioned before. And to do that, we need to add in these components of a story to engage someone, validating the cues, modifying the difficulty with adaptive algorithms, having variation so it's not the same thing over and over again. And putting these things together is going to make it scalable and reliable. So thank you so much, everyone. And this is my favorite view on campus at Santa Clara, like right before the sun sets at that dusk. It's beautiful.
Can you say a few more words about the lab, about the context in which this program started?
Sure. So Prashant Suri, his name was up there earlier, he's the director of the program. And about 4 years ago, he envisioned having an interdisciplinary lab that partnered with external stakeholders, where the project ideas are coming from community organizations, clinicians, industry. And that's where the project ideas come. We bring them to the students so that the students are working on real world projects in healthcare, which was kind of unmet at Santa Clara. and that they would be mentored and be involved with industry partners while doing the core of their work on campus, which also kind of solved the problem of internships and transportation. And that's where this was seeded. And I joined basically at the inception with this VR neurofeedback project as one of the first internal external partnerships with the Asian Art Museum. And since then, we've grown out to this full program. We have a mentorship program for the high school students. We have a fellowship program for our undergraduate students. And the fellowship program is primarily for students who are first gen to college and have not had the same level of exposure to healthcare careers.
Very good. You have a question?
Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay, so why VR? Okay, so for
Why VR versus
pure meditation? Because meditation's hard. Mental imagery is hard, and many of us need a bridge. I do, and this is one of my motivations, because sitting quietly in a space, even with the music or other people, my mind wanders a lot, and the meditation has on its own always was more anxious for me, and I need that bridge telling what's going on in my body to build that mind-body awareness, and this is a tool to do that. And so VR just does it a little bit more intensely than a guided meditation.
Is it a two-part question?
Oh. The gamify, not always. Some of these are just experiences. When we gamify, then there has an economy to it. There's an objective, you win or you lose, there's points, and a high degree of interaction. And so for me, that's not the objective in my design process with these projects.
Okay, so now you're going in depth in this project.
Mhm.
Can you see applications of the technology, the infrastructure you're building?
Mhm.
Can you see application of that infrastructure to something else in the future?
Yeah, there are a few ways. One is in games. So, and I said I'm not gamifying here, but in other ways we can. So when we can reliably extract the brain signals, we can use that to modify the environment of any game. So if someone is reading out more tense, you can change the lighting in the environment to make them more calm as they're playing the game, and you can manipulate the senses that way. So that's a one application with finer control and different EEG metrics. You can actually substitute the brain activity for game controllers for selection of items, turning right, turning left. And so that kind of is the next level of brain-computer interfaces in gaming and VR. So that would be a completely different direction.
Talking of brain-computer interfaces, what kind of progress you see in the near future? I mean, will they give you, will the new devices coming to, I mean, I know there's a lot of startups working on this.
Yeah.
Do you see devices coming to market that they will greatly improve what you can do?
There are. There are two key tech changes that have happened in the last couple of years. One is in the dry electrode design, so that you do not need to have a Faraday cage room and gels and all these other things in order to pick up the signal. The dry electrode design is at a point that you can do mobile EEG anywhere. And almost anywhere. There are some places that are just a little bit too electrically noisy, but you can do that almost anywhere. The other key change has been the Wi-Fi connectivity. The EEG devices out there are Bluetooth or Wi-Fi enabled. You don't need to hook them up to anything. And the VR devices are becoming the same. The Oculus systems are all standalone now. So you can link the two together and do all of your processing in the cloud. So that you're not constrained by your local computing resources. And that will enable this technology to be in the home and be on the go.
Okay, any questions from the audience? Yes.
So I wonder how many students ask you involved in the project and how long they into the demo?
that first demo you saw, that was work from January. Did we start January or February? January is when they started training, 2022, and they presented early May 2022. And that was 9 students. We just started our next cohort, and we have 4 students carrying over, and we've added 4 new ones. So that with the high school so far in this less than a year, it's 13 students. But we are planning on expanding that program so that we can bring this type of experience to many high schools. And so we're working on that implementation plan and getting funding in place. But we're working on those partnerships. 2, 3 additional high school organizations are on board once the funding comes through.
Yes.
Are there any future projects you're working on?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Future
projects. One of the other things I'm working on how we're expanding this out is to work with EEG devices that have more electrodes so that I can extract more interesting signals. And right now, what you're seeing here was based on, for the neurofeedback, only 2 channels. And so you can really only get a global measure of what's going on. The other system that I'm working with has 16, which will allow me to develop experiences that train sustained attention, coherence, and other cognitive skills. So the idea here is to expand the applications, expand the use cases, and to design experiences that promote each of those use cases.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.